Now you're sure you'll be finished your work by then? I wouldn't want it to be godmotherless in its early months, nor Freya, anymore. She's missed you as much as I have, you do realize that? Did you get her drawing, by the way? She let go of Cecilia, and picked up her tea. Tippex had her kittens, replied Cecilia. And they were going for cold, hard cash at school? Until Mrs. Dreves caught her, and sent her home with them in the middle of the day, laughed Libby. It was a good job I was in at the time, or else I don't know what would have happened. Libby and Cecilia continued to chat for another half an hour. They talked through mundane things, Libby's work, her mum, the price of petrol, the new road being built just south of Edgeford, the economy, and Cecilia was glad she still kept up to date using the self-updating Mull Studies books which had been mysteriously left outside the classroom all those months ago. As the conversation petered out, Cecilia felt her heart sink as Libby took her by the hands and kissed her on the cheek. Usually at this point they organized another date and time to see one another, when they would be meeting for coffee, or going out shopping together. She felt out of the loop, out of her usual routine. Yes, of course they were chatting like old friends, about important things. And of course Cecilia was promising her she would tell her everything when the time was right. But that couldn't be now at a time when she so needed to talk to Libby. Now when she wanted her advice over many, many things. And that's what hurt the most. Eventually both women made their way downstairs, and Libby handed Cecilia back her teacup in exchange for her coat and scarf. Cecilia led Libby to the front door, peering round the living room door when she registered silence to find Remus in the armchair reading a newspaper. He glanced up at Cecilia when she looked in, and looked across to the sofa. Cecilia and Libby followed his glance, and there was Freya Elizabeth fast asleep, her chestnut brown hair cascading over the edge of the settee, contrasting beautifully with Cecilia's cream sofa, with a book clasped tightly in her hands. Libby and Cecilia exchanged looks before Freya's mother walked into the living room. On cue, Freya woke up, rubbing her eyes and looking bewildered for a second. "Are we going home now, Mummy? Are we leaving Auntie Celia's house?" she asked, with an innocent look of, "What can I get away with?" in her eyes. "We certainly are, darling," replied Libby firmly, having none of it. "And what have you got there? I didn't know you had any new books, Sec." "Only the Lady Birds," said Cecilia, crossing the living room and sitting on the sofa. It was Mysterious Mythology. She'd recognize that cover anywhere. "Where did you find that one, eh?" Remus looked at her sharply. "I found it under the stairs, Auntie Celia. And that man with the pink slippers read me a lovely story. He's nice. Can I keep it?" Libby saw a look of horror in Cecilia's face and turned to her daughter. "I really think you've got plenty of books at home, darling," she said quickly. "And if it's Auntie Celia's, then you can't." "But the stories are really pretty," protested Freya. "And you always give me something when I come and visit." Freya. "But she does, don't you?" Freya turned her look of contrived innocence to her Aunt Celia. Cecilia felt herself nodding. "But not that book, sweetheart. You can choose another book from the cupboard." "Oh, but I want this one," Freya protested. "He said it was the best book in the world," she added, throwing weight behind her cause. "I did," said Remus, smiling at the girl. "But I gave that book to your Auntie Celia, and she has been using it in her work. I expect when she's finished with it, she'll let you have it then." Cecilia looked at Remus, who smiled evenly back at her. "And I have," said Cecilia, stroking Freya on the head as the thought of where they would be going in the next few days and what they would be collecting from a certain scene of magical crime flashed across her conscious mind. "Mind you, it is a very special book, with very special stories in it. Do you think you could take extra special care of it for me while I'm away?" Freya nodded over dramatically. before fixing Cecilia with a stare. "You're going away again? With him?" She pointed towards Remus, who had chosen just that moment to hide behind the newspaper again. Cecilia shook her head. "With work," she said. "To help discover some more things," she qualified, a feeling of regret at leaving Freya again very soon clinging like a cloud in her chest. "So if you can look after this book for me, you'll make me the happiest auntie in the world. Can you do that?" Freya nodded again, and reached out to hug Cecilia, mysterious mythology between them. "I'm going to miss you," Freya continued, waving as Cecilia crossed the floor and opened the front door, her mother leading her through it. "So," began Remus, looking back up from the newspaper as Cecilia returned to the living room. "Your friend seemed nice. And her daughter." "Libby," said Cecilia distantly as she sat back down and pulled out the marking of Ron's essay that she had been doing before they had arrived. "And Freya. I know she'll look after the book, Remus. I heard you reading Grimelda to her." "And when would you like me to take you to Godric's Hollow?" he asked, putting down the paper and getting to his feet. Cecilia looked sharply at Remus. Godric's Hollow? Light dawned and she turned in realization to look at her wonderful man. "Hers? This afternoon?" she asked hopefully. Then she could get over to Nick's work and run the DNA analysis, otherwise it would take far longer if she had to do it by hand at Hogwarts. Remus looked down. "Not this afternoon," he replied, his shoulders sagging. "I'm not feeling quite myself. How about tomorrow?" Not feeling well, thought Cecilia. In the usual sense, or something magical? Could she do anything? Should she ask him? "Not tomorrow either, I'm due at Mum's at 1 o'clock. Remus looked crestfallen. "You mean you're not spending the whole day in bed with me?" he asked playfully. Cecilia tapped him on the arm in return. She told him. He knew. "So that leaves Friday," confirmed Remus, reaching over to Cecilia's waist and pulling her onto his lap. "Your fourth day?" "Friday," she replied as Remus leaned over her and kissed her, setting alight her senses, her mind, body. 88,888,888. Darkness. Except for a tiny glimmer of light in a mole house in the middle of England. "It's nearly your time of month, old thing." Sirius's head flickered green in Cecilia Frobisher gas fire. "Yes. You look exhausted." Dumbledore said the odds have been upped. Not in those words, of course. I've seen neither a hide nor hair of anything so far, though. "You still want to stay with her?" It wasn't a question. Like Cecilia Frobisher knew her friend, Sirius knew his. "I've not told her. Tunks is worried about you. We all are." "Here we go, Sirius, Tunks." Remus shifted in front of the fire. Neither position felt particularly comfortable, and the pain in his back and limbs was getting worse as every hour passed. "No, I didn't mean it like that. I didn't ever promise her anything, Sirius." But it was implied. Sirius knew it was cruel, but it had to be said. "You never denied it and she thought you were still in love with Lily." Lily? Remus considered his old friend. She was there for him at a time when no one else was. How could he not love her? "Well, she'll find out by tomorrow herself, Moony, whether you want her to or not." Remus said nothing. Since the moment Cecilia had kissed him, in Tunks's room at Grimmauld Place, he had considered little else. "Things have changed, they are not what I thought them to be. Dumbledore said. "If I'd have known, Remus, why on earth didn't you stop me yesterday? It was not like I planned it." "Well, actually, you admitted to everyone that you did. Cecilia is safe here, with me. She will not accept you. You do realize that? Not after Dash." "Yes, I am fully aware what the situation is like, Sirius. But Lily was a witch, accustomed to magical things." "And how is that better?" Surely it is worse. Cecilia didn't judge people in the way that wizards did. There was a chance, always a small chance, that she could accept him. But could he really put her through it? The month has left me with no choice. Then I will see you in Forbidden Forest. Remus nodded, stiffly, and Sirius returned it. The fire dimmed and the room went dark. Only the moon, shrouded by cloud, tormentingly close to fullness, lit the room. Remus looked at the sheet of blank paper he had found in Cecilia's spare room, which lay near her green biro on the coffee table. Tears in his eyes, he began to write. 88,888,888. It was nearly midnight when Cecilia returned home. People say that the worst feature of Christmas was that you have to spend time with relatives that you can't stand. This, they say, is due to 3 reasons. You have to pretend to like the presents you're given. You become more relaxed and are therefore more likely to say what you feel, rather than what you say the rest of the year out of politeness. And the 3rd reason was because while you cannot choose your family as you can your friends, you can choose to reveal their dark and deepest embarrassing moments, and they're yours, when you've had one too many whilst pursuing reason number 2. Tension, like a coiled spring that had been almost at breaking point, got less and less each step Cecilia was to home. Rejecting the offer that her mother had made of calling a taxi, she told her that she would feel better after a good walk home, promising to pick up the telephone and let the connection ring 3 times to let her know she was home safely. It wasn't that she couldn't stand her mother, she loved her very much. But as the years progressed, through her marriage and independence, Cecilia's tolerance to her mother's fussing had decreased, and what had made the visit doubly hard was that Jane Wells could imperceptibly determine when Cecilia was telling a lie or evading telling the truth. Cecilia made her way along Edgeford High Street, beautifully decorated with lights, as she tried to forget the last 7 hours filled with Mrs. Wells's concern of the lack of contact she had made in the last 6 months. How well Mrs. Frobisher Sr. was looking, and the minutiae of the conversation she had had with Cecilia's mother-in-law. And hadn't Cecilia lost weight? The clothes she had bought her for Christmas wouldn't fit now. But she could take them back to M&S because the receipts were in the bag. And how Justine Frobisher, Cecilia's other sister-in-law, had married and moved to Canada, and how wonderful that must have been. And how she hoped it wouldn't be long before Amy settled down, and got herself a proper job, and considered her money, and perhaps it wasn't too late for her to go to university. The road shops had slipped past Cecilia's line of sight now, and the street gave way to Victorian terraced houses. The lights in the window and the overflowing recycling and dust bins told the stories of other people's Christmases. A child here with a pink bike, another 2 doors down with a new television. At least her sister had taken the brunt of it in absentia this time, and Cecilia silently thanked her sister for her thoughtlessness, which had worked in Cecilia's favor. The knot in her stomach had begun to untighten now as she made her way into Acacia Avenue, where Victorian terraces morphed into large, 1930s detached houses, with long gravel driveways and tall evergreen trees. The streetlights became more spaced out now, whether by accident or design, but residents' own lights dotted around automatic gates more than made up for it. Cecilia's thoughts drifted now to thoughts of the future, a topic who up until then she had ignored over a more lackadaisical, carefree approach. She wasn't by nature spontaneous. She'd wondered more than once over the last couple of days where her blitheness had come from, and had come to the conclusion that it was a self-defense mechanism. A well-known psychological phenomenon. Now she was only 10 minutes away from home, she thought as Cecilia stepped out the next half-mile, as her spirits soared with her increased pulse rate as she anticipated home, and who would be there. She would speak to him. They had agreed to do so when she returned, plan what they would do. Decide whether it was the right course of action. Be grown up about it. And as she put the key in the lock, Cecilia failed to notice the absence of lights as she strode into the kitchen and did her duty with 3 rings. Once she'd done that, she flicked on the lights, making her way over to the kettle and unplugging it, filling it up with water and putting it on to boil. Pulling out a couple of mugs from the cupboard above, she smiled as she pulled out a bottle of milk she had remembered to buy from the local shop that morning. Remus could have milk in his tea without having to resort to horrible, inconvenient magic. Remus. Well, he wasn't in the living room, the light wasn't on. Unless he was asleep, Cecilia thought as she walked out of the kitchen and into the hall, which was possible as he had been quite tired that morning. No. He wasn't there. Cecilia turned to switch off the light and make her way upstairs, to see whether he'd gone to bed. No. Not upstairs. Returning to the kitchen, Cecilia poured 1 cup of tea and made her way back to the living room, idly wondering where he would be. And that's when she saw the note, lying unobtrusively on the coffee table. She picked up her cup, taking a sip, speculating on what it would say. And the world stopped. The hot black tea seeped through the cream fabric of the settee, inching its way towards the curtain. The last few drips clung to the rim of the cup which lay vertically on the floor, bereft of its contents now. She sank to her knees, her wrist catching the edge of the table and her new skirt, a gift from her mother, tearing at the hem. None of these events registered in Cecilia's subconscious as she gripped the note, the green pen shaping 2 bitter words indelibly on the paper. And without warning, Cecilia crumpled. Anguish racked her body and hot tears cut saline valleys deep into her cheeks. Her body shook involuntarily and she sobbed harder than ever she had done before. Time passed. She did not know how long she sat there, shocked and broken on her living room carpet. Feelings started to penetrate her hypothalamus and her subconscious patrolled the front line of her mental defense, repelling negative, bitter shots with calming, consoling caresses. Slowly, her tears began to dry up, and the passing of time began to register again. 1:15. Cecilia realized she had been sitting on the floor for half an hour. Had she gone to sleep? Oh bloody hell. Cecilia blasphemed aloud. You are so pathetic. He's dumped you, you stupid fool, and you cry yourself to sleep like some lovesick teenager? Like your name's Ellie, and you're a blonde, willowy 6-foot thing who swoons when someone winks at her and thinks it's a major crisis if she breaks a nail. Cecilia knelt forward. Her breath was still ragged, a flow of lactic acid replaced in her muscles by glucose molecules as she breathed deeper and more evenly. The cramp in her leg muscles dissolved away as her strength returned. Of course he was going to leave you, he's a man. He was running away from his problems, and now you were the problem. She clenched her fists, furious with herself for her own imperfections, digging her never-before-tonight manicured nails hard into her palms. It's not like you're even good-looking, not stunning, head-turning. Who looks at the plain girl when the pretty, young, slim girl. The sweet, baggage-less girl. She leaned over to the picture of her and Tim that she had seen Remus staring at yesterday morning, and throwing it at the wall. When that girl is right back at his best friend's house. She raged. Was that fair? She'd just spent a fantastic 3 days with Remus. Well, he'd been at her house for 3 days. 3 breathtaking, soul-melting days. Days that would be the making of a perfect romance, worthy of a screen performance portrayed by the likes of Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio. Cecilia looked down at the piece of paper crumpled in her hand as the biochemical process of respiration clicked into place in her mind. This time, the words would be gone, she told herself. This time, it wouldn't say that. And if, by an extraordinary coincidence that they were there, then they didn't mean what she had first taken them to mean. Carefully, she uncrumpled the page. 3/4 of the way down, she knew, the 2 words were sorry. Goodbye. This time, the tears weren't choked but they flowed torrentially from her eyes as they had done before, and she screwed up the note again, dropping it on the coffee table. How could she believe she'd misinterpreted his message? Cecilia pulled herself up onto the sofa, glancing at the telephone that lay next to the Christmas tree. She badly wanted to call Libby, to tell her about this, how foolish and used she felt. To have her best friend in all the world comfort and console her, telling her that it would all be alright again. But in order to explain why she hurt so badly would mean she would have to discuss the magic world with her, which was out of the question, or tell her every 5 minutes that she couldn't tell her the details because of the Official Secrets Act. Libby didn't need that. It wasn't fair. Cecilia looked away again and back at the note on the coffee table. There was no misunderstanding. Remus had dumped her, simple as that, underlining their association with two very simple W. A crack broke the still of the early morning silence like a stone against a plate glass window. Cecilia let out a shrill scream. Getting to her feet, she instinctively rushed toward where the sound had come from, her first thoughts filling her head that it was. Crack. Crack. Green light flashed in her hall. Cecilia looked harder into the darkness. Remus? She whispered tentatively. When there was no reply, she took another step, bolder and more furious this time towards the obviously magical disturbance. Come on then, whoever you are. The words tore from her lungs as her pain was transformed to aggression and the volume of her voice increased with every word. Sirius? If it's you and you've come to see me, come to gloat, then I'll warn you now. You're in my house now and dash. Mrs. Frobisher. Cecilia. She blinked in the darkness. She recognized the voice. And the form that was approaching. I apologize for the intrusion, and that I had to depart so suddenly on Christmas Eve. I made the presumption that you would understand. As she sagged to her knees, Severus Snape caught her under the arms, pulling her back to her feet. Cecilia put her arms around him, unthinking, uncaring about protocol or propriety, and began to sob again. Eventually the tears subsided and she wiped her eyes, pulling away. Snape said nothing, waiting for her to take the lead. Well, it's very nice to see you, Severus, so early in the morning. Would you like a cup of tea? She gestured in the direction of the kitchen and Snape turned before turning back. Mrs. Frobisher, I apologize for arriving here at such an hour. Perhaps we could go into your living room? This is quite urgent. Nodding dumbly, Cecilia led the way and sat down on the arm of the settee. She followed Snape's gaze as it took in the teacup, and stain on the furniture, the broken picture and the scar in the wallpaper. The crumpled piece of paper on the coffee table. Before I begin, I should say that your presence is required urgently at Hogwarts in order to continue with our work. I should also say that due to a change in security levels which the Order of the Phoenix are struggling to manage and my own presence being required for other work, he held up a hand as Cecilia was about to interrupt, we need to leave as soon as possible. Cecilia looked away. She had barely given Severus a thought since the party. Her mind had been so wrapped up with other things. Oh, she had considered her work sure enough. Snape had been there, as part of the scenery, in her mind's eye when she had planned the work they would be doing. And now he was here, when she was at her most vulnerable, when not just one, but two wizards had treated her so cruelly. Also may I say, for the record Cecilia, that certain members of the wizard community have treated you most ill. For that, I extend my condolences. Cecilia returned her gaze to Snape, feeling her heart splinter in her chest again. Without saying anything, she walked towards him, patting his hand as it rested on the back of her chair. Thank you, she said, her voice clipped and short. I'll be 5 minutes. She had her bags packed within 5 minutes, stumbling down the stairs with her 2 bags stuffed with items of clothing, books and other paraphernalia collected as quickly as she could, some which hadn't even left her bags and others that had been in her room and in the spare room, unsorted and raked together like leaves. Snape was at the bottom of the stairs and he pulled out his wand, long and spindly from inside his robe, as if to help her. No, said Cecilia, struggling with the bags. Carry them if you like, but no magic. I'm not quite ready to leave my world just yet. Without arguing, Snape took both of her bags, following her into the hall. Cecilia poked her head round the living room door, checking she had picked up everything she wanted. She opened the telephone table drawer and pulled out a pen, scribbling a note in the flowery-covered book that was within to let Amy know she had left. Throwing in her house key and dragging her mind away from anything other than their departure, she got to her feet, sighing deeply and glancing at the floor. "Come on," she said, looking at Snape. She got to her feet and put her hand on the doorknob. "Where?" Severus looked back, still holding her bags. "We need to leave now, Cecilia," he reminded her, taking a step towards the living room. "No," she replied. Snape stopped mid-step and looked at her. "I'm going back to Hogwarts so we can do the work," she clarified, "but not by flu. Not by broom or night bus or portkey or by any other magical means. I couldn't face that just yet. If you're intending to accompany me, then come on. Otherwise, I'll see you near Hogsmeade in about 6 hours' time." Turning, Cecilia made her way out of her front door, her car key in her hand that she had swapped her house key for out of the telephone drawer. To her surprise, Snape followed her, allowing the door to shut locked behind him. He looked at her wordlessly as she threw open the boot of her car, lovingly mistreated, Cecilia thought bitterly, by her sister. Once her overfilled bags were in, she slammed it closed with all her might, hurrying round to the right-hand side and jumping into the driver's seat. Snape followed her, sitting himself uneasily in the passenger seat. Cecilia looked at him, her eyes narrowing, and she leaned across him, pulling on his seatbelt. "Safety," said Cecilia, leaning back in her seat and starting the Alfa Romeo car. "I don't think there'll be much chance of me driving slowly tonight," she added, turning the key in the ignition and flicking on the headlights. "It seems an adequate vehicle," commented Snape politely. "I do hope you'll not be exceeding the legal speed limits." Cecilia nodded in total disagreement, revving the engine high a few times as she threw the gear stick into reverse. As they tore off down the street at high speed in Cecilia's almost beautiful sports car, lights flicked on randomly in houses as she passed. If she had been in any shape to notice, Cecilia would probably have smiled. 88,888,888. I trust Mrs. Frobisher is now at Hogwarts. Indeed, Headmaster, she is in her room, sleeping following a draught of peace. I believe the last few days have taken it out of her. However, if you wish to speak to her now, I can send an elf," said Dumbledore, shaking his head. "No, let her sleep. It will cleanse her and help her heal. She is a strong mole, Severus, but a mole still. We cannot pretend she will not be affected by either Sirius Black's or Remus Lupin's actions. Perhaps it would be easier on her if we told her." Minerva folded his arms, speaking quietly. "Cecilia is broad-minded and not the type of person to allow just anyone into her heart, from what I can see. She would understand." Dumbledore glanced at Minerva and was about to speak when Snape took a step forward. "It doesn't concern us. It mustn't. Lupin's business is his own. She must see that work and life are separate." Snape glanced across to her, withholding as much of himself as he could. "But they are connected, Albus, don't you see?" Minerva looked between Snape and Dumbledore. "If she continues with her work, she will be involved with both wizards. A cruelty," Minerva concluded, shaking her head slowly. "Black's reaction demonstrates his incapacity to accept the use of Lily Potter in our work will be to Harry's advantage. The task the boy is to undertake is dangerous, and any assistance she can afford him should be welcomed, whatever the means." "Dangerous?" exclaimed Minerva McGonagall sharply. "Dangerous? Potter will be stripped of his powers with the potion you are developing, and at the present time you have no reassurances that he will regain them. If he survives. She wrung her hands in despair at Snape's understatement of the situation. Dumbledore rose from his chair again, considering both of the teachers before him. Both of them had the best interests of their greatest asset at heart, and both of them with whom he must allow to continue to do so, each from their own standpoint. I agree with you both. It was always a risk that I anticipated before I contemplated my involvement, and for the second time this week I must confess to a lack of anticipation in the actions of an Order member. I did not expect Sirius Black to declare her Mistborn, and this presents us with a new set of difficulties, for it is an open invitation for any wizard to legally do away with her. Especially considering the precariousness of Mrs. Frobisher's situation. He rose to his feet, looking at both Minerva and Snape again as he spoke steadily. She is connected both personally now and professionally. Her single-mindedness and dedication is remarkable, and I know she will not be dissuaded easily from either aspect of the work, for she believes them to be inextricably linked. Both professors were looking at him now, unmoving and silent. Dumbledore had always allowed Cecilia Frobisher to work on her own, and had been firm in dissuading them from guiding her course. Mrs. Frobisher must be persuaded to concentrate only on the potion for Harry. However, she is not safe, however she feels, at Hogwarts, and so her work must be swift as well as accurate. It is for this reason that I must now reveal to you. Dumbledore stopped suddenly, darting a glance at both McGonagall and Snape. No, not at them, past them, then turning swiftly towards the portraits. Then quickly behind him towards Fawkes, before raising his wand and thrusting his arm quickly forward towards the main door that led down the spiral staircase and onto the second floor of the castle. A rim of silver blue light outlined the door, sparks crackled off it, and Dumbledore turned quickly, thrusting his arm out to the back door. Despite being shrouded by a curtain, its outline illuminated in silver blue, like the first. Then Dumbledore turned in a circle 3 times anti-clockwise, his beard spinning out as he went, and he cast 3 spells: imperceptibility, imperturbability and uninterpretability, each making the room's walls fizz in different colors, as if the room was being dissolved in a strong acid. Dumbledore turned back to his professors, who had mutely watched him perform the strongest combination of spells they knew. The room was now safe from every known intelligence and intrusion spell in existence. Finally, Dumbledore flicked his wand, conjuring a city of violet hue and bedecked with large comfortable cushions. "Please, sit," he gestured as he began to pace before his desk. "I have need to disclose to you sensitive and potentially dangerous information, which are in fact the answers that Cecilia Frobisher is seeking." Minerva McGonagall and Severus Snape exchanged glances before looking at Dumbledore. He was not normally this detailed, and they could only assume that what he was about to reveal to them was very important indeed. Had there not been a change in circumstances, I would allow her to continue her research in her own manner. You have always known that there would be only a slim chance that Cecilia Frobisher could pull it off. This has now narrowed her within the breadth of a hair. But Headmaster, surely we are aware of the circumstances. They are not vital to the making of the potion. Snape looked incredulously at Dumbledore as he stopped pacing and flicked his wand, so an armchair of the same design as the settee appeared before McGonagall and Snape, and then sat on it gently. You are both aware of some of this. You are aware of how Lupin is involved, Minerva. He glanced at McGonagall, who nodded slowly, and how he came to owning the most intricate testament to the collaboration between moles and wizards in the whole world. And Severus. He looked at Snape carefully, who dragged his eyes away from Minerva as he tried to work out what Dumbledore was saying. You are aware of Avery, a Death Eater in the service of Voldemort, and what information he has unsuccessfully been able to extract from his elderly father. However, thanks to Raymond Lully and his abilities as a reciprocator, you do not know the whole story. 88,888,888 In the silence of the early hours of the morning, in the garden of a much-loved mole scientist, trespassers trespassed on her property. One of the trespassers held up his hands as he approached the back door, holding up his hands and, without speaking, or putting much effort into it at all, if it came to it, made Cecilia's back door implode spectacularly using sparks which energetically sprang from the palm of his hands. Another trespasser looked at the first with contempt. They wanted to enter her home without making much noise, he knew this, and here he was, her lump of a husband, causing as much noise as a clumsy oaf could. The trespasser turned quickly from her husband and stepped forward, over the shards of double glazing that were strewn everywhere, followed by other trespassers. "Sh." The woman held up her hand. "Let me find her." Between the palms of her hands the trespasser, "Okay. Yes. We could call her, and them, by another label, another name. One that was more potent, and laced with more horror. As it is 5 o'clock in the morning, on the Thursday after Christmas, we will consider the neighbors, in the way that the owner of the house didn't an hour ago. The people who are waking up with the early morning light and wishing they hadn't drank that last glass of whiskey, ate that last mince pie, picked up that last bird, delete as applicable." The trespasser clasped her hands together, waiting for the greenish-yellow light to form between her palms before moving them slowly apart. She placed her head into the bubble cloud that was formed, moving her head from right to left, as if she were looking for something. Or someone. Suddenly, the trespasser pulled back her head, slamming her palms back together again with a loud clap. "What?" said the first trespasser, the woman's husband who had broken the back door in so loudly. She turned, a look of fury daring from her dark eyes. "There's no one here, God's damn it!" she roared, slamming her fist against Cecilia's hall wall. Another trespasser took a step behind the woman, glancing around in the semi-darkness before tearing into the living room. "Search the house," the woman demanded. "She must be here, somewhere." "He said he would meet us here," said Bellatrix Lestrange's husband, still loitering on the doorstep. "We should wait." She turned to Rabistan Lestrange, throwing him another contemptible look. "If he was going to meet us here at 4:45, with it, he would be here." She growled the words menacingly as the other 3 Death Eaters, "We are going to risk that the neighbors who made unfortunate choices last night are now up," returned to them, shaking their heads. "It?" Dolohov looked inquisitively at Bellatrix. "Don't you mean her? Don't be so stupid. It's a mole, it doesn't even matter if it's male or female. They're not even worthy of that." "Ah!" Bellatrix thrust her fist against the wall again. "There'll be a reason, Bella. There'll have been a change of plan because of the order." Anton Dolohov looked at her now. A tempting reason. "Perhaps, Dolohov. However, that excuse is wearing thin. He has been to the house, but he is not here now. And neither is it. Think. Bellatrix Lestrange paced up and down the hall, considering the options carefully. "We need to search," she said decisively, pushing past the other Death Eaters. "They can't have got far, and they haven't flewed. They can't have operated because it cannot tolerate it. The night bus is off duty. So the only other ways are on foot, or by broom." Without waiting to be told twice, one of the Death Eaters conjured a broom, tearing off into the weak dawnlight without looking back. Another turned on his heel, dashing quickly down the entry by the side of the house, through the gate and onto the street. "It would be a pity to waste time looking here. They could be anywhere by now," continued Dolohov, glancing at Bellatrix. "Ah yes, Severus's little prize. Well, he has truly paid for her now, although I would question whether his agony at our master's displeasure will be worth the possession of a pathetic male." The 2 Death Eaters who had left just now returned, shaking their heads. Bella's look grew darker as she realized they had been thwarted. "In that case, search the house again. If we find nothing, Then we report to the Dark Lord tonight and await further instructions. He'll have some slippery excuse why he's not here with her, prompted Rabistan Lestrange. You know he'll get out of it. The Death Eater, who had searched the sky for them, silenced him by placing a hand on his arm. Listen, we've disturbed the neighbors. He looked at Bellatrix, her arms folded in frustration. We don't want to cause a scene here, it'll stir up trouble. The Dark Lord won't thank us for it. She nodded, looking at the fifth Death Eater. He nodded too, before bling his fist round his wand, expressing as much if not more frustration than Mrs. Lestrange. Bellatrix turned and considered the house, holding her wand aloft. A purple light irradiated the house and she turned back to her companions. There. If anyone returns I will be alerted. That filthy mole, when I get my hands on her, I'll... You'll what, Lucius? Talk at her? Torment her? Break her? No. You had your chance. Draco had. Bellatrix stopped as Lucius stepped towards her, a murderous look in his eye. Draco did his part, he growled. He succeeded. It was Snape who failed. Rabistan Lestrange took a step between the two Death Eaters, breaking their deadlock stare. We had it, under eye hand, Lucius. Bellatrix raised her wand, aiming a bolt of yellow light towards the mirror, at the other end of the hall, smashing it to smithereens with rage. We also have a means of communication which you managed to successfully plant on the mole, however, I fear has not been used as much as I would like. Lucius Malfoy folded his arms, giving her a smug glare. It is just a shame your second mistake did not match your first success. Bellatrix's voice started off low, like the growl of a tiger, building in ferocity and strength. Not only could Draco not produce the book, but he had no idea what it possessed. You can never comprehend the enormity of the loss to the Dark Lord. She cut off, and Lucius recalled the humiliating torment he endured before his contemporaries, arguing silently that he probably could. But Avery, Lucius began, on a new tack. Avery has searched his father's very soul for the memory, leaving him a frail, decrepit wreck, and has discovered no information of merit. We can only assume he never knew it in the first place. She padded out to the edge of the broken door frame and looked up towards the sky, shuddering at her thoughts. The Dark Lord accepts only results. He will be most displeased. And Snape? What will be his fate? Lucius pressed, in an effort to deflect attention from his own faults. By breaking his vow, that which he swore in front of us all, in front of the Dark Lord, by blood. Dark fire flashed behind Bellatrix Lestrange's eyes as she savoured the revenge that would very soon be meted out. He has surrendered his existence. Voldemort will take his life.